Hi, friends. I'm Heather Miller, CEO and founder of social impact startup Grasshopper, talent acquisition and DEI specialist, mom of 2 humans and 3 fur babies, most under 4, former professional ballet and hip hop dancer, yoga teacher, interior designer, caregiver, provider, retirement planner, innovator, social connector, and the list goes on. As you can tell from my bio, I've always taken drive to the extreme, and for the most part, done pretty well juggling all of my hats. However, I say this on behalf of most of us, the past 3 years have been very challenging. My personal experience included moving to an unknown city, the unexpected death of my mother, and the birth of my first child 2 weeks later, launching a startup during maternity leave, the pandemic, building diversity strategies for a global corporation in the wake of George Floyd's death, another baby, and then, the icing on the cake, a layoff. I felt like I was approaching a midlife crisis with no space to do so. As a result, I've been thinking about balance and whether that's actually a thing. Join me as I speak with some amazing thought leaders and women in my life to understand how they keep the fire going and the lights on while staying sane. We'll explore drive, juggling priorities, taking no prisoners with your schedule, love and sickness, pursuing your dreams, enjoying the journey, and figuring out what is right for you. We hope these conversations help you err on the side of midlife epiphany versus midlife crisis. Welcome to Balancedness. Rowan, welcome to Balancedness.
Hello. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you here. I feel like it's been in the works for a while.
Mhm.
I think we got to know each other. I was thinking about this last night because I did a podcast with my sister several months ago on resilience. And I came across something you had written on resilience. And you have to tell us more about this, but I think you mentioned that it's something that you wrote during the pandemic as like a community aid or some kind of community
Yeah,
effort
that's
you were working on.
in lockdown. Me and a dear friend and a colleague called Claire Breeze were running a series of resilience sessions each week, but we would kind of have a little bit of input, a bit of a thought really, and then there would be a meditation reflecting on, and then a conversation. And so the article that you wrote was really a transcript of one of those sessions that was right in the kind of the middle of lockdown, which I think was the myth of balance.
Yes, that's
I think
correct.
that was the title of it, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, I will come on to that, I'm sure. But yeah, I think, and that's how you heard of me.
that's how I heard of you. And
Yeah.
I said, I was remembering this last night. I said on the podcast, I said, Rowan, wherever you are, if you're out there, I'm coming for you. And then I went down the rabbit hole to find you, and here we are.
Well done for finding me. And sorry, yeah, it's taken a while for us to get here, but I'm really glad we're talking.
I'm glad we're speaking as well. I know you've been really busy, and I'm excited to hear why. But maybe let's start. The audience wants to learn more about you, so please introduce yourself to the community. And because we're talking about balance, please include all the things that make up you.
Okay, all right. That's a lovely question, by the way. So professionally, I run a consultancy called Made to Move, and the connecting strand of everything that I do or hope to do is to support people, teams, and organizations to move through change, and always towards something which is healthier, whether that's resilience or a better performing team. It could many expressions, and as part of that, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a coach, an executive coach working with senior leaders, usually in big corporates, and I'm a team coach as well. And then probably the final piece of that, and which I'm sure we'll come on to, is I'm really interested in resilience. So I do work with teams, people, and groups to build resilience, and again, to support them to move through change.
That's really
Hold
cool.
on, that's just the I'm so used to not bringing in the personal side. So the personal side, um, so you're in America, I'm in England. So I live just in or just outside of London. I'm married. I've got two young daughters, and I think remembering your bio, two furballs as well, two cats. Um, I I'm English, but I used to be American. It sounds a bit cryptic actually, and I've just become Irish. Um, I used to grow up in Hong Kong, and probably because of that, I grew up near the sea and spent a lot of time on the sea. So really, I'm happiest on the water. I used to be a a windsurfing and sailing instructor. I kite surf these days, but actually, increasingly, despite that love of the water, I found myself in the mountains more recently. Was in the Alps in France last month. Me and a friend cycled through the Pyrenees 6 months ago, which is the mountain range that connects Spain and France. Um, and also not so much with a young family these days, but I used to cycle across continents. Used to kind of, if there was a wedding in Sicily, which happened, a friend of mine got married, me and some friends would decide just to cycle there. So we kind of cycled down into Italy, through Italy, and then down into the Sicilies at the very heel of Italy. So really, we'll talk about movement. I think the genesis of movement kind of has physical roots. Like that's really, I'm from an adventuring perspective, I've always enjoyed moving my body, and it's kind of become more psychological in my work. But again, we'll come on to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, several things I definitely want to touch on, but I noticed I came across your Instagram. It's all pictures of you cycling and kite surfing and I think there's some sailing on there. I'm not sure. Lots of hiking.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was really impressed, and that really resonated with me as I was discovering what you do, that movements at the base. I think I mentioned this to you. I was a dancer, so grew up as like a professional ballet dancer, transitioned to hip hop. But anytime that I'm stuck in anything, I find that I need to go back to my roots, to a place where I'm practicing movement. Like that is the
Yeah,
focus, and it unlocks energy and innovation, creativity
yeah,
for me.
yeah.
One example is and now it's several years ago, but I was just on the cusp of developing grasshopper, and I was really stuck, and I was like, you know what would work this out? Some good old yoga teacher training. So, I went into this intense 6 month period, and honestly, like the walks to the yoga teacher training, the intense meditation, and just the movement as well is always something that cures things for me. So yeah, we are going to get into it, but I think we have that in common.
Yeah, I think that's such a lovely connection. I really deeply believe that the body in movement is a way to kind of access what's going on. It leads to deeper conversations. It leads to insights. Yeah, it's a very rich and probably underlooked tool as a way of
Yeah.
creativity, impact, change.
Well, we're excited to hear more about how you use it as a tool. I was telling you
Mhm.
last night in the pre-call, it just stands out to me as when I read your work, when I read your website, and it's coming across your Instagram as well. So I want to
Mhm.
hear more about the roots of it. But let's start with balance, and um I won't ask if you think about balance, because I know you do think about balance, but in what way?
Okay. Um, I might begin in a way in which I don't think about it, and then I'll talk about the way in which I do think about it, because I think this is the myth of balance, that article you referenced right at the beginning. I think there is a version of balance which is seen as static, or kind of like evenly weighted, like scales, where everything needs to be in a perfect harmony with each other. And there's a kind of a perfection mindset that I think underpins that everything needs to be perfect. And often in that kind of balance, this kind of fixed balance, I often find that there they come with fixed conditions of things that need to happen for things to be in balance. So it could be like, I need to eat this food and not that food, and I need to get this amount of sleep, and I need to have this amount of time not working. They're all things which are perfectly reasonable, but there's like a fixedness that comes with it. I think it's a version of balance that often is perpetuated by the well-being industry. Again, that kind of perfectionism. So I'm not referring to that kind of balance. For me, the balance that I refer to and I'm interested in is a dynamic and constantly changing balance. So there's a movement in the balance. It's imperfect, and for me, there's a beauty and a creativity in it. You see it all the time in nature. You know, the wax and the wane of the moon, the ebb and the flow of the tide, the comings and goings of the seasons, even like breathing in and out. There's a kind of an outward energy, and there's a kind of, like a wave, there's an upward kind of energetic expansion, a kind of a plateauing and then a contraction. And again, the same thing you see in careers, in relationships, even in our lives. We're kind of born and we die. You know, the old gives way to the new. Like all of that is a balance of sorts. And I think that's the type of balance that I can speak to that if we need to, if we want to more. But I'm just going to say one other thing, Heather, to slightly contradict myself. I think there is definitely something to be said for being out of balance, in that I think when we're out of balance, and no one wants to be out of balance because often that's obviously, but actually, no, there are times when we intentionally put ourselves out of balance, and there are times when it just happens to us when we don't wish it to happen. But both can be very growthful periods in our life, professionally and personally. I think it's when we grow and move the most is in those kind of unbalanced moments. And then even, you know, going back to organizations and change, I think often the work that I do is to nudge people and teams out of balance, actually, because for that very reason, that's where you get the movement. You know, you have to be careful with balance as well, that it can reinforce the status quo. So there's a question of when is balance serving us and when is it not serving us?
Can you give us an example of how you push towards unbalance in your team? And I know we'll get into this further later, but just curious since you just brought it up.
I think one way, a very key way, is having the difficult conversations. I think any team or any person, any relationship, there might be things between people which are uncomfortable or are pushed to the side, are not spoken about, or the conversations can happen in the corridors, not in the actual room. Fundamentally, it is bringing those conversations out from the shadows and into the room and having them, but doing it in a way that is safe, compassionate, appropriate. If it's unsafe, you're going to make things worse. So there's that kind of balance between kind of care, love, and support, and bringing the on balance. And if you get that combination right, then I think then you get the change.
Challenging conversations is a great example, especially as it relates to teams. So thanks for bringing that up. I want to learn more about your career trajectory. So I know that you moved from sustainability services in your early career, if you could categorize it that way, to the founder of Made to Move.
Okay. I'm going to say this as simply as I can, because like all career paths, there's twists and turns. I got into sustainability really because I grew up in Hong Kong. And I think what I saw in Hong Kong was it's not just the Chinese, and it happens all over the world, but the Chinese approach to construction and development was to kind of cut a road through the mountain and to spray a mountainside with concrete, you know, and just to kind of cut down the forests. And even as a kid, that didn't sit comfortably with me. So when as a young adult, I was trying to work out what to do with my life, I found this thing called sustainability and working in organizations, you know, in support of that. And I found this master's program that it was still early days in the industry, really. And it offered me a kind of a career route into these companies working in sustainability teams. And as much as the big corporates have a huge part in all that destruction, I at the time thought they also had the financial clout and agency to also be a force for good. So that was my kind of attraction to them. I ended up working at Deloitte for many years, and it was great. But what I ended up finding was that those sustainability teams in these companies were very disconnected from, the kind of the commercial strategic parts of the business. So there wasn't real change going on. So I was disillusioned and I was looking for something different. And I ended up meeting who is now a kind of a very close friend of mine called Kershid, who ran this consultancy, still does, called Reloom. And he works with executive teams, challenging the status quo with senior leaders in businesses. And even though it was not sustainability, for me, there was a clear connect, because I think sustainability at its best is to challenge the status quo of the way in which we go about every aspect of our life, the economy, society. It needs to be challenged for us to be living a more sustainable way of life. So I always went into that with that intention of connecting that back to sustainability. It was a much bigger career change than I anticipated. But it's actually where all of my learning, my proper learning and growth, I learned more in the first couple of years with Kershid and his colleagues than I did through school and university. It was like an awakening almost. And so a couple of years later, I set up Made to Move, and it's an expression of the same work. It's as you know, I said, it's just to kind of move through change. I thought it would be physical in nature. So when I first set it up, I had teams walking up mountains, and I had a couple of clients cycling on bikes with coaching. So I very explicitly brought physical movement into the work. But as time has gone on, it's become much more psychological. And for that reason, that's why I trained as a psychotherapist, seeing the kind of psychology of movement, the psychological aspects. So I look at movement in a very holistic sense now, the physical and the psychological. Yeah, that's probably how I ended up here.
How trend-setting of you to be in sustainability work so early on. It's such a buzzword now. When I think about consulting or any environmental work or anything that is done right now in big business, everything's shifting towards sustainability. So you caught the early end of the trend.
Yeah, no, I did, and it's come on leaps and bounds since then, and I have an intention, I want to bring here is a lot of the work that I do now. I want to bring it much more explicitly back into that world that I think needs it. I think they're doing great stuff, but also I think there's the psychology of change is often missing in the sustainability work that goes on, and resilience as well, for that matter. So I think there's a need for it.
And how did movement of energy become the base of your work?
I think so. Over time, when I work with people and teams, I'm always looking at patterns. So a pattern that supports and a pattern can be a behavior. It can just be a way of relating that supports movement to happen. And I'm particularly interested, obviously, in patterns that keep us stuck. And over time, I've just started to see that those patterns, there's some kind of, they have an energetic quality to them. So for example, I'll just give you a couple just to bring that to life. Some people and teams, so there's individual patterns and there's cultures, which are kind of collective norms of patterns, right? So with a fast-paced organization, that there are patterns where it's very chaotic and it's go, 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 and then something new comes along and they drop the old thing and they come onto the new thing. It's very fast-paced, it's very exciting, but it's a little bit like a fly. It's like settles, and as much as stuff does happen, it also can kind of cause stuckness. So that would be like a kind of a fast-paced energy system, I would describe it. But then you can also you can have also a low energy system, which is very sluggish. It's very resistant to change. Everything's a problem. There's a lot of reasonable reasons why this thing can't be done. And often, I've spent a bit of time working in local government and government. You often see that in kind of, it might be different in the US, I'm not sure, but in the UK, that can be very low energy, just glacial pace. Yeah, so that would be, and I've got 5 of those that I've kind of developed in terms of energy systems and how you work with them.
Do you want to go into those kind of
Do
5
we,
pillars?
I talk about the other 3?
Go for it. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So fast paced. So I'd call it a high energy system, and that can cause, because the chaoticness and it can't see something through. So that can cause a version of stuckness. Then low energy systems I just mentioned is just everything's very slow and sluggish. So nothing really gets off the ground. There is an inconsistent energy system. So a part of the system, but when I say system, it can be a person or an organization. An inconsistent energy system is one part of that person or organization really wants to change, and there's another part that really doesn't. And often you engage with the part of them or the part of the organization that is up for the change, but beneath the waterline, they are also subverting it and resisting it and preventing it from happening. But you can also see that, again, this will be true of America. You see that in, election cycles in, in a government. They win the election, and then there's that first 100 days when stuff happens and there's hope and optimism. And then, as you will be in America, the minute you're coming to the end of a term, everything just slows down and stops, doesn't it? So it's that kind of inconsistent energy system as well. I think there's two more. There's a stuck energy system. So there's just something that is very specifically stopping from change from happening. A company I worked with in not too long ago was working with the executive team, and they were it just so happened there was a hostile takeover going on. So there was something getting in the way for the work that we needed to do that just prevented it from happening. But then with a person, it could be that there's a fear of the change that they're actually seeking. So again, the thing that they want is the thing that they're afraid of, and that can cause a stuckness. And then the other one I would describe as an always on energy system. It's not high energy, it's not low energy, but it just never knows how to switch off. It's always chugging on. And those kind of companies or people often, they just become quite transactional over time. They become quite siloed in the way in which they do things. That kind of connectivity and the relational aspects of working together all just kind of dry out over time because they just don't know how to switch off.
That's really helpful. And so I know that you have diagnostic tools when you go into an engagement. Are there times when let's say the company that's hiring you has no idea what sort of phase of energy or energy level they're at? You use your diagnostic tool to kind of understand the type of engagement, the type of work that you'll do for them?
I do, yes. What I don't do, I love that question. I am going to develop a more explicit diagnostic tool, but at the minute it's more, I use what I described to you as a diagnosis. So a high energy system tends to need a lower energy intervention. So a company that's always going crazy, like go, 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 what they really need is they need space to stop, pause, reflect, slow down. So it kind of informs my thinking. The low on energy organizations or people, they need someone to light the fire from under them. Not in an arsonistic kind of way, but like rekindle the flame, the passion, like what's important for us here, where do we want to go? So it just informs that. So it's really, that informs the intervention, and then I'm always responding, what happens next, what is needed. And often, you can go from one energy system to the other. A low energy system might become a high energy system, and then you've got to just respond accordingly. So I kind of use it in a very iterative way. It's not like a linear, here's the 5 steps to becoming, more movement. Life is too messy, and so are organizations.
Yeah, for sure. How does resilience play a role in your work? And I'm so curious to hear more about how you think about resilience, and this is why I tracked you down in the first place. And also, what is the link between resilience and sustainability for you?
Yeah, Heather, I love that question. Okay, so I'll answer it in two parts. Why do I think resilience is key for change, and then why sustainability? So I think that resilience is key for movement and change. There's a few reasons, but two come to mind. One, transformational change at its heart is destabilizing, potentially anxiety provoking, and resilience helps us through it. So, when we are resourced, uh, it allows us to lean into that change a bit more. And also, we know if it's too much, we know how to step back. There was another thing around that I was going to say, and it's just gone, it'll come back. But the other thing I would say around resilience and change is that when you're trying to change something, there is often the status quo is seeking to reinforce it. And one of the way, it can happen in many ways, one of the ways that I think it happens, and again, I'm saying this from an organizational context, is I think we are all very busy and stressed. I've just been working in one of those organizations, and one of the reasons why it's been hard for us to connect for the last couple of months. And I think in a way it is designed to keep things the way that they are. So resilience is also a way to resource ourselves in the face of the status quo, trying to keep us busy and exhausting us. And when we're stressed, we revert to type. The more stressed we are, the more likely we are to fall back on old patterns and habits. And resilience allows us to develop new ways of relating and new patterns, which is what you need for change. In terms of sustainability, when you seek to change something and you put a disturbance into the system that you're looking to change, the disturbance comes back at you. So disturbance flows both ways. And again, if as a change maker or anyone seeking to make change, again, you have to manage the anxiety or the attacks or the fear that kind of comes back at you. Not too long ago, I watched, Greta Thunberg, the climate activist.
Oh, yeah.
So I just watched a BBC documentary on her a couple of weeks ago, and she, is, as a change maker that she is getting that the whole time. She gets the vitriol, the abuse, the hate, and that all lands on her young shoulders. And again, that's why I think resilience is key. It's not for her just to hold it by herself. I think she needs a huge support network, but I think support and relationships is part of resilience. And then the final thing around sustainability, I think, is I think burnout is rife for people who are seeking to change, because there's constant pushing, and often it feels very hopeless. I just think I spoke to a couple of people sorry, I'm just trying to think what's UK centric and what's US. Do you know Extinction Rebellion?
No.
So that's a movement in the UK then.
It might not be. It just might mean I haven't heard of it.
I think it's UK centric, but they've kind of dissipated in recent years. But it really, since 2019, they were really staging these protests and kind of they described themselves as, it's like a civil disobedience movement. They were blocking roads, and the big orbital road that goes around London, and they were doing disruptive tactics to raise awareness around climate change and the lack of response from the government. And I met a couple of people in that organization, and they were all heading for burnout just because they were pushing, and it just seems to kind of come with the territory. So again, I think that's why resilience, this ability to bounce back, to find your energy amongst the despair, because I think there's a lot to despair about in what's going on in the world at the minute.
For sure. But as you said, sometimes that burnout is the catalyst for change. I mean, it certainly was for me last year, and the reason why I developed this inquiry into balance, and the reason why I'm doing this podcast, and the reason why I'm on the precipice of totally, hopefully, turning my life around, in a positive way. So I can,
Can I just put, Kelly, can I just check that with you? But I think
yeah,
so that came from being out of balance for a period. I mean, the burnout was being out of balance.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
something is come from it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was, and I was thinking what was at the center of this. And for me, it's just like this innate sense of drive. So I am no stranger to balance. Like I'm trained in meditation and mindfulness and yoga, and it's, been a practice of mine since I
Yeah.
was little. So
Yeah.
it's like I know what to do, but I think, as you just mentioned before, when you get to this place of stress, you revert to patterns. And so mine is drive. It is just this like go, go,
Yeah.
go. So in my case, it was working, a full-time job in consulting at McKinsey and Company, running my own startup,
Yeah.
having two children and
Yeah.
three dogs all in a really condensed period of time, and just working and working and working to the point of
Yeah.
burnout.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
think I really had to get to like a place of complete chaos to really
Yeah.
understand my limits, and
Yeah.
then understand how I could change my patterns.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense, and that's the pattern I'm describing. Is sometimes, I mean, I wouldn't wish that on you, and I'm sure it was not at all enjoyable, but there can be in time a gift in it. Sounds
Yeah.
like that's the gift, and this podcast is one of them as well.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
this podcast
Yeah.
is the biggest gift of it. And it was, for me, it was a therapeutic tool. It was kind of like I didn't know how to unravel my patterns, but the one thing I did know was talking to people and having conversations and doing that exploration. So I figured if at least I could give that back to an audience, I could be at service in some way while I was also
Yeah.
trying to,
Yeah.
learn and serve myself.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's great. I love it.
What type of diagnostic tools do you use to
Mhm.
analyze, how and why energy is stuck, and how do you remove those blockages through your work?
Um, so it depends. It depends greatly. I mentioned again, this isn't linear, so I can just give you some examples if that's
Please
helpful,
do.
just to bring
Yeah.
it to life. So, well, actually, I mentioned one of them a minute ago. With high energy organizations who are, the intervention is to get them to slow down and recover, and that's not easy. That can be an intervention in itself. Let's just stop. And how do you keep on learning how to breathe amongst the busyness? Um, Awakening low energy systems. Again, it can be many things, but it can be sometimes they need a bit of a bump, bringing those uncomfortable, difficult conversations into the room. It can be often it's a trauma response. A low energy organization or a person are it, there's so Kershid, I mentioned, this is one of his phrases from his work from Reloom, and it's how do you describe it? Wake up to what sends you to sleep. So it's the I'm working with a client actually who has that very response. So it's to pay attention and to kind of like gently and with care put the hand over the fire of the things that is sending them to sleep, and that can be an intervention. um Finding new energy sources. But also, people can get lost in their busyness. So, what is your purpose? What matters? What is your vision? How do we get there? How do you resource yourself to do it? Um, they all have an energetic quality, if you see what I mean. There's a kind of like that's following your energy. I could go on and on, but those are just some examples.
I want to pivot to talk about your therapy work. So you're also a Gestalt therapist. Am I saying that correctly, by the way?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, perfectly.
I
Yeah.
was channeling my grandparents' Yiddish pronunciations of things and
You did
really
well.
hoping that I could work that out. So how has that offering as a service deepened your work. And I'm also curious how you chose that path of study. I have a theory, as you know, again, as I'm just sort of a fly on the wall observing what you put out there as your personal brand. To me, it makes
Yeah.
so much sense that you chose this as your foray into therapy, but I want to hear more about that.
Can I hear your theory first? I'll tell you what it's done, but I'm interested to know what's your theory for it?
So I did very brief research on Gestalt, and so what I understand is that you're looking at the present as opposed to
Yes.
the path to understand, like, you know, the ailment. It's very
Yeah.
much, if I could put it into kind of like modern trendy terms, like sort of Eckhart Tolle's like the power of now.
Yeah.
And I was actually looking at, I think there's kind of a wheel of change in Gestalt, and there was something around like unlocking energy in the, and as you know, a tool for change. And I was like, aha, this is exactly it. And this makes so
Yeah. Yeah.
much sense why Rowan you know, has
Yeah,
gone
you've
down
you've
this path.
you've done your research, and it's also very movement and body orientated. But the thing you said about
Amazing.
the present, it's called working in the here and now, and it's a very powerful way of working. It means that you're always attending and looking at what, you know, between this is me as a therapist now, between a therapist and a client, what is happening between us in this moment. And the thing that you do actually look in the past, because the old patterns, the patterns that we have in our life, the way in which we are in the world and the way that we relate to other people are often patterns that we developed earlier in our life. And some of them become stuck, which is what brings them to therapy. So those old historical, you know, your childhood and your kind of early years development shows up in the here and now always. And it's a case of finding them and looking for them and working with them. But if you work with them now in what's happening, it's a much more visceral way than saying, oh, this thing happened to me 30 years ago. And, you know, it's not that you don't talk about that, but it's how is this showing up in this very moment?
I know what it was in that wheel, actually. There was something around arousal and the beginning of awareness, and that
Yeah,
made so much sense in the context of you.
it's the cycle of experience you're referring to.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's sometimes called the cycle of awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's very figural in my thinking. But to your question, what was your question actually? I've
Well,
forgotten it.
I'm just curious about how it's deepened your work,
Oh,
and
that was it.
how
Okay,
you've, you know, incorporated this as part of your practice.
okay, okay. Three things. Uh, it has given me the means to, again, I talk a lot about patterns. It allows me to understand and see and work with those deeper relational patterns that show up in a person, but also because organizations are made up of people, they show up in teams and organizations and cultures. The therapy training has allowed me um, to do that, and it's also given me the psychological framework to support that movement. So there's a kind of theory of change that really comes from Gestalt, which I've made my own, and I add stuff onto it. But that movement process, stuckness and movement, its underpinnings have Gestalt in it. But then the other, actually, I'm going to say too that the other one is to be a change. I'm going to call myself a change agent here. To be a change agent, you have to be solid and better and able to hold the anxiety and difficult conversations needed to kind of go through that change process. And there are it's very easy to get sucked into the patterns that you're seeking to change through countertransference, for example, co-transference.
Yeah. For sure. Before we have to go, and I'm so sad to cut this conversation short, and I'm already imagining a way to kind of have a little bit more of a conversation with you post this. But as I mentioned, I've got to go to Muscle Energy. physiotherapy after this, which is very apropos.
It's very appropriate.
Yeah, but we were talking about this a little bit yesterday in our pre-call, and I just want to hear again for you, for the benefit of the audience. In your psychotherapy practice, you have limited yourself to a certain amount of clients, and that is, as you described it, sort of a self-protection tool. Also, we don't want it to overshadow the other work that you do. There needs to be space for it as well. But we were talking a little bit about empathy fatigue, as one of my former podcast guests called it, but I think you had another name for it.
Yeah, compassion fatigue is the
Yes.
is the phrase, but I think, I mean, without having researched the names, I think it's referring to the same thing.
I think so. And so I'm curious about how you're intentional about that, and in order to sort of keep the balance of your work.
Yes, we did talk about that, didn't we? For me, I just have just from experience now, I think there's an optimal amount of clients for me, therapy clients, because I love the work that I do, and I do get a lot from it, but there is a limit to how much difficulty you can sit in with another person week in, week out. And that line will depend on, will vary from person to person. So for me, it's, yeah, I do 1 day a week working as a therapist, and I worked in a prison last year working with female prisoners, and you know, that was, I learned from sitting with those prisoners and hearing their stories. That took me very close to the edge of you know, that kind of compassion fatigue. It really energetic, back to energy. It really impacted my energy levels. So I learned from that it's not so much about number of people, but it's just the base level of complexity collectively between a number of people. So from 7 or 8 people, you might want to only have 1 or 2 very complex clients in terms of kind of traumas and, you know, personality disorders or whatever it might be, and have, you know, other ones where the complexity where it can be more straightforward. So I kind of think it more in that level.
Because you get to a place where I guess you're tapped out, you don't have enough to give back. Is that the feeling?
Yeah, there are signs, and again, for everyone, it'll be different. My sign is that I will be, I start to become quite desensitized, numbed out, just generally tired. I need that extra coffee. I'm reaching for the sugary snacks. All those things are signs for me, but it's really a case of people needing to find what are your signs that you're heading to the edge of something that you need to change.
Well, Rowan, thank you so much for this, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'm excited that things are busy for you, but also wishing you that balance, which sounds like you know how to maintain, or at least keep yourself within, you know, the healthy realms of it. So thank you for being here, and I know the community is going to get back so much from this conversation.
Heather, thank you. I love the questions and I enjoyed it. So good to be on your podcast.
Thank you for supporting another episode of Grasshopper's Balancedness podcast. If you liked it, please rate, review, and subscribe on our Apple and Spotify pages. Send me a screenshot at hello@grasshopper.com. That's GRASSHOPPHER to enter yourself into this episode's surprise raffle. And be the first to hear about upcoming episodes and events by signing up for Grasshopper's newsletter, which can be found on our website. Happy balancing until the next time.